So when we're speaking about the Spanish, another thing that they taught us through this Pan-African story was something called white supremacy or white supremacy. So in order to push this, they wanted to tell us that our slave masters were white people and that, you know, we were taken advantage of or in a docile position. But the truth of the matter is, this is King Philip of Spain. This would be the guy in control of what is said to be the transatlantic slave trade. It would be a melanated man as well. So one thing I brought to the game, I call it Big Six to the board. When we identify the black European, we have to identify that the people that came here from Europe did look like us. It's how we know that the Spanish were melanated. Well, this guy right here, this coming out of Prairie View A&M, the first African American in history come from Africa is Esteban the Moor. Now they're coming from North Africa. It's a difference. So we've been fed a West African story, but when we're talking about Florida, because there's going to be the first set in 1526 to 1565. Well, these conquistadors that's going to come, what did it say right here? Black conquistadors were as much part of exploration of America as their Spanish counterparts. So this wasn't YT people who did this. These are the Africans that they're going to speak about that's going to come into this area, into Florida. Ponce de Leon, you're going to get St. Augustine, this would be what they'll call the first city here. Well, that was occupied by the Timucuan people. Now, here's the Timucuan people right here. They're known in history. They have what you call Blackamoor art in European museums. This coming out of German museum. Now, in the Green Vault, the statuette is actually based on images of indigenous Americans, and this is Big Sac, who was actually mixed with Peruvian and Timucuan. Now, right here we go to Jason B. Palmer for God Sacrificing Native American Involvement in Construction of Castillo San Marcos. We see that the Appalachians, Timucuans, and the Gullers toiled over 24 years and built this Castillo San Marcos. Now, this Hispanic settlement, this is going to be important. I'm setting it up right now so we're in Florida with it. The Timucuan were also rebelled in 1656. Now we're getting off the Gullah Geechee corridor, what they call it today, since the 1980s, okay? Because this is not an old story. We're going to get to it. All right, so we have tribes in South Carolina is the Hoya. We had the Escamouka, who were the largest, Edisto, Mayam, and you also had the Coosa. Now, this is the coast right here. This is 1562, 1751. And you can see here's the Escamoukas right here. These are the tribes. It took the Spanish 8 attempts before they actually settled. So they lost all those battles to them. Also, 1563, Brabant came here with the French, the Huguenots, settled Timucuan land. They got ran off the block. That was called Fort Caroline. So we're going to push through here. Now, later on, an anthropologist named Franz Boas they're going to start putting labels on people based off their geography. So they're not going to go by the original tribe or nation that they're called. They're going to name them. So we get a people called the Casaba in this area of what we call Charleston. Why is Charleston so important? Because the Spanish had Spain. So South Carolina would be occupied by these Indians. But they had an international port there called Port Royal today. We'll get to that. So we're speaking about the Low Country. These people will be identified as Casabas. Now, the Escamoukas will go to war right here. The Edistos, and they all go to war in Carolina, the Gullah on the southeast coast between Savannah and Altamar River. Now let's walk. When the British come into play, they're going to go to Virginia. We went through Georgia, established Georgia as Gullah. Now in the Ogeechee. Now we go to Florida. We see the tribes down in Florida, the Spanish, and we're going to come over here to the English. 1603, King James united the crown. May 14, 1607, they get a settlement. 1606, they get the Virginia Company of London. All of these guys are melanated people. This is something that the teachers before us have left out the story. Now, as we get into it, we see King James. He's going to be over Virginia. Well, African story is going to be tied to that. This is what the people did to us. They're going to put an African story on it. One of the most recent is the 1619 Project, okay, by Nicole Hannah Jones. Well, she said that 20 odd Africans came over here on boats. Well, if we go to the primary resource, right, Image 267 Records Virginia Company 1606, Miscellaneous Records of Virginia Company, what we find out is that these people are going to come from the West Indies, okay? The trail, boats, horses, bearers, they're going to come from the West Indies. And right here, he brought not a thing but 20 and odd Negroes with the governor Cape Merchant about the versatile at the best rate. He had large and excellent range of purchase in the West Indies, not Africa. Somebody came back and wrote an African story on this, but when we go to the records of the Virginia Company, right here, this library comes primary source, page 243, we stamping everything. What I'm saying is this transatlantic slave trade was a hoax. What really happened was Europeans were sent over here, and the Europeans that sent them looked like us, and the Europeans that were sent also were melanated people. Let's walk through it. Colonial America works, Herbert Applebaum, right? So page 9. He speak about them bringing over 300 to 400 servants. This is the English migrating their people over. 600,000 between 1650 and 1780. Most migrants went to the West Indies, some 2% went to New England, and so they're gonna spread them out. Now, we're gonna go to a primary, and I'm walking it down, I'm finna set it up, I'm doing this for a reason. Now, progress of the nation in civilization, productive, wealth, and population. On page 581, the governor of Virginia town was Berkeley. Berkeley is gonna say his population in Virginia was 40,000. 2,000 slaves, 6,000 were white indentured servants. The importation of slaves did not exceed 2 or 3 cargoes in 7 years. So it's impossible for this mass transatlantic slave trade to be going on when we go back to the primaries. Let's see who he said he had came on the slave cargoes. Now he tells us that you had an estimated 1,500 annually. The most were English, a few Scots, fewer Irish, okay? Fewer Irish. Never mentioned Africa, not one time. Now let's walk. Now this is the European migration that they're coming over from Europe and being sent as indentured servants over into the 13 colonies. Now we'll get to Charleston. Why Charleston is important? We're back here because we're going to set up this Gullah Geechee paradigm that they talk about today, which is an American Indian story that's going to be wrote over. Let's work. So 1670, they'll get Charlestown, which aim was to discover the interior parts of Africa. Okay? And since we're on South Carolina and we didn't establish that the king is melanated, we're going to establish that the slave owners also were too. Black slave owners, free black slave master, South Carolina, 1790 to 1860. The slave master who had the most slaves was William Ellison Jr., a melanated guy that looked like a lot of people and probably, you know, bloodline related to a lot of these people. So boom, we in Charleston, 1706. And the early English effort at St. Augustine, which is Florida, this is also a failed mission. Carolina militiamen and Indian warriors defeated Franco-Spanish raiding parties, and English ships drove the French fleet off the harbor. Okay, so now we're gonna come down here to Port Royal. You had the Yamasee tribe of Georgia moved to the headquarters of Port Royal to be near their trading partners. Yamasee raids on Florida, instigated by Scottish traders, prompted the Spanish retaliation and destruction of Stewarttown, 1686. So we see different Indians who were allied with different European nations. The Indians outnumber the European nations, by the way. Now let's walk it down. When we get over here, you had Governor James Oglethorpe was a defender of the Stewart family, those black kings that founded Charleston. Well, they need to get closer to this port down in Florida, so they're gonna establish themselves in Georgia. A place called Darien County at the time was the richest place. And you're gonna get Savannah, and you're also gonna get Spalding, Georgia. Now that's gonna bring us to Georgia. We're gonna run through it. We setting it up. Georgia. We gotta go through Florida, Georgia. The real Gullah gonna come out of there, and then the Ogeechee River, and then we got South Carolina and this Florida. We finna make it make sense. So boom, the Highlanders that landed in Florida. This James Ogletree, and he's there for the Stewart family. He's a Jacobite. So here's the Jacobites right here. Now we know the Jacobites were melanated because we go to what's called the Jacobite gleaning. When they lost the wars, they became prisoners right here in the States. This is a description of 150 rebels who was taken prison. Now it's going to name their age. It's going to give you their name. It's going to give you their age, their occupation, their place of birth, their height, and it's going to tell you what color they are. As we see swarthy, you see black, you see tall and slender, brown. As we come down here, dark complexion, well-made, black hair. Here go one with pale complexion. Here go one with fair, brown, dark complexion, well-made. So we know that these people are going to also look like us. And when we go to Virginia colonial soldiers, You also see, when we look on the list, these Irishmen, these people that's coming out of England, they're dark with brown hair. The Englishmen, they go a fair one. But Virginia planters dark. But you're seeing these European people who are dark skinned.